I think that success is a process. And I believe that my first Easter speech in the Kosciuszko Baptist Church at the age of 3.5 was the beginning. And that every other speech, every other book I read, every other time I spoke in public was a building block. So that by the time I first sat down to audition in front of a television camera and somebody says, read this, what allowed me to read it so comfortably and be so at ease with myself at that time was the fact that I'd been doing it a while. If I'd never read a book or I'd never spoken in public before, I would have been traumatized by it. So the fact that we went on the air with the Oprah Winfrey Show in 1986 nationally, and people say, oh, but you're so comfortable in front of the camera, you can be yourself. Well, it's because I've been being myself since I was 19. And I would not have been able to be as comfortable with myself had I not made mistakes on the air and been allowed to make mistakes on the air and understand that it doesn't matter. You know, there's no such thing to me as an embarrassing moment. No such thing. If I tripped and fell, if my bra strap showed, if my slip fell off, if I fell flat on my face, there's no such thing as an embarrassing moment because I know that there is not a moment that I could possibly experience on the air that somebody else hasn't already experienced. So when it happens, you say, oh, my slip fell off. And it's no big deal. I mean, like, I was on TV the other day and somebody says, oh, Oprah, you have a run. Have you not seen a run before in your life? Well, I get them too, let me tell you. So, I mean, I can't be embarrassed. I can't be embarrassed. Now, when I first started out, that was not true because I was pretending to be somebody I was not. I was pretending to be Barbara Walters. So I'd go to a news conference and I was more interested in how I phrased the question and how eloquent the question sounded, as opposed to listening to the answer. Which always happens when you're interested in impressing people instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it took me a while. It took me messing up on the air during a live newscast. I was doing a list of foreign countries, and there was all these foreign names, and then Canada was thrown in, and I called Canada, Canada. And I got so tickled that I called Canada. I go, that wasn't Canada, that was Canada. Excuse me, that wasn't Canada, that wasn't Canada, that was Canada. And then I started laughing. Well, it became the first real moment I ever had. And the news director later said to me, well, if you do that, then you should just keep going. You shouldn't correct yourself and let people know. Well, I know, well, who's ever heard of Canada? So that was, for me, the beginning of realizing that, oh, you can laugh at yourself and you can make a mistake and it's not the end of the world. You don't have to be perfect. And biggest lesson for me for television, because then it didn't matter. Didn't matter. Oh, sorry, bra strap showing. I only came to co-host a talk show because I had failed at news and I was going to be fired. And the news director was paying me $22,000 a year. God only knows what my co-anchor was making, but was paying me $22,000 a year. And they thought they were paying me too much money to only just do news stories. And so I'd been taken off the 6 o'clock news and was put on the early morning, like 5:30 cut-ins. And they tried to convince me at the time. They said, you know, you're so good that you need your own time period. So we're going to give you 5 minutes at 5:30 in the morning. And I was devastated because up until that point, I'd sort of cruised. I really hadn't thought a lot about my life or the direction it was taking. Because I'd happened into television, happened into radio, sort of happenstanced. I don't believe in luck. I think luck is preparation meeting opportunity, but I felt like I had somewhat prepared myself, but that I had happenstanced into it. So I thought, okay, I was working in Nashville, and so I moved to Baltimore, and then I'll do this for a while, and then I don't know what I'll do. And so when I was called in and put on the edge of being fired and certainly demoted and knew that firing was only a couple weeks away, I was like devastated. I was 22 and embarrassed by the whole thing because I'd never failed before. And it was that failure that led to the talk show because they had no place else to put me. They put me on a talk show one morning. And I'm telling you, the hour I interviewed, my very first interview was the Carvel ice cream man and Benny from All My Children. Never forget it. And I came off the air thinking, this is what I should have been doing, because it was like breathing to me, like breathing. You just talk. Be yourself is really what I've learned to do. And so from the very first day I did my very first talk show, I knew it. I knew it was the right thing to do. I felt the same thing about acting too, only I was so terrified that it was a little more difficult for me. For me, the turn on in acting, the turn on is the ability to express another person's life. I think if you can internalize and then manifest externally the essence of another being, that is the ultimate in understanding. What it takes to take somebody else's life, make it your own, and put it out there. It's the ultimate. You understand things about people that you could never imagine. It's like almost for a while getting to live somebody else's life without having to experience all of the experience that comes with creating another life. Quincy Jones had, I would not even say an important role, I would say the role in my acting career. Quincy Jones discovered me. And it's so interesting to me because when I was working as a television newswoman in Baltimore, and really all I wanted to do was be an actress, but I was doing television, and I felt at the time, well, I can't quit this job because this is what everybody else wants to do. And if I quit this job, what am I going to do? And I was going to a speech coach at the time that the station had sent me to. The broadcasting school, they sent everybody to the same woman. And I was telling her, I really don't want to do this. What I really want to do is act. And she says, my dear, you don't want to act, because if you wanted to act, you'd be doing it. What you want to be, my dear, is a star. Because if you wanted to act, you'd be waiting tables in New York. And I thought, now why am I going to wait tables if I'm already working in TV? So I said, well, what I think is going to happen is I will be discovered, because I want it so badly, somebody's going to have to discover me. And she said, you just dream. You dream, you're a dreamer. So when it happened, I called her up. I said, you will not believe this. I got discovered. And it really was a discovery. It's like one of those Lana Turner stories, only it wasn't a drugstore. He was in his hotel room, saw me on TV. It was unbelievable. So the interesting thing about that is that I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change power and success in the world. Everything begins with thoughts. I mean, the chairs that we're sitting in, the room that we're in, all started because somebody thought it. So I thought up The Color Purple for myself. I know this is going to sound strange to you. I read the book. I got so many copies of that book. I passed the book around to everybody I knew. If I was on the bus, I'd pass it out to people. And when I heard that there was going to be a movie, I started talking it up for myself. I didn't know Quincy Jones or Steven Spielberg or how on earth I would get in this movie. I'd never acted in my life, but I felt it so intensely that I had to be a part of that movie. I really do believe I created it for myself. I wanted it more than anything in the world and would have done anything to do it. Anything to do it. The most powerful scene in The Color Purple for me was a scene where Sophia walks through the cornfield and proclaims herself to Celie, defines and proclaims herself, where she says, all my life I had to fight. I had to fight my cousins, I had to fight my brothers, I had to fight my uncles, but I never thought I had to fight my own house. I did that scene in one take because it was the essence, I thought, of my life. And very liberating to live it through Sophia, because at the time that I spoke it, I wasn't there yet. Because what she is saying is, I fought people all my life, and I'm not going to fight in my own house anymore, in my own space anymore. I'm going to have what I deserve. And it's taken me a while to get to where Sophia was, but it was so liberating. It was all, I think, a part of the process of growth for me to recognize it can be done. I was raised on a farm with my grandmother for the first 6 years of my life. I knew somehow that my life would be different and it would be better. I never had a clear-cut vision of what it was I would be doing. I just always felt somehow. I remember absolutely physically feeling it at around 4 years old. I remember standing on the back porch. It was a screened-in porch, and my grandmother was boiling clothes because, you know, at that time we didn't have washing machines, and so people would, you know, physically boil clothes in a great big iron pot, and she was boiling clothes and poking them down. And I was watching her from the back porch, and I was 4 years old, and I remember thinking, my life won't be like this. My life won't be like this. It will be better. And it wasn't from a place of arrogance. It was just a place of knowing that things could be different from me somehow. I don't know what made me think that. I always wanted to be an actress for most of my adolescent and adult life. My father didn't want me to be, because his idea of what an actress was one of these, you know, lewd women, and how are you going to take care of your life? So I always wanted to be an actress, and have taken, I think, a roundabout way to get there, because I still don't feel fulfilled as an actress. I still feel like, okay, I own my own studio and all this, but I'm thinking, I did all of this just to be an actress. I just want to be able to act. For a while, I wanted to be a school teacher. In the 4th grade, Mrs. Duncan was my greatest inspiration. In the 4th grade is when I first, I think, began to believe in myself. I, for the first time, believed that I could do almost anything. I felt I was the queen bee. I felt I could control the world. I was going to be a missionary. I was going to Costa Rica. I used to collect money on the playground to take to church on Sundays from all the other kids. And at the time in schools, we had devotions. And I would sit and I would listen to everything the preacher said on Sunday, and go back to school on Monday morning and beg Miss Duncan to please let me do the devotion, just sort of repeat the sermon. So in the 4th grade, I was called preacher. Kids used to poke fun of me all the time. It didn't bother me because I was so inspired at the time. And a lot of it was because of Ms. Duncan. Mrs. Duncan, Mrs. Duncan. And we did a show not too long ago, and I had favorite teachers on. I just broke down because, first of all, it was the first time I realized Ms. Duncan had a name other than Ms. Duncan. You know, your teachers never have names. I thought her name's Mary. I couldn't believe it. Well, I was born, as I said, in rural Mississippi in 1954, and I was born at home. And there were not a lot of educated people around, and my name had been chosen from the Bible. My Aunt Ida had chosen the name, but nobody really knew how to spell it. So it went down as Oprah on my birth certificate, but people didn't know how to pronounce it. So they put the P before the R in every place else other than the birth certificate. So on the birth certificate, it is Orpah, but then it got translated to Oprah, and so here we are. But that's great because Oprah spells Harpo backwards. I don't know what Orpah spells, so. I came to live with my grandmother because I was a child born out of wedlock, and my mother moved to the north. She's a part of that great migration to the north in the late 50s. And I was left with my grandmother, like so many other black youngsters were, left to be taken care of by their grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles. And I was one of those children. It actually probably saved my life. It is the reason why I am where I am today, because my grandmother gave me the foundation for success that I was allowed to continue to build upon. My grandmother taught me to read, and that opened the door to all kinds of possibilities for me. And had I not been with my grandmother and been with my mother struggling in the north, you know, moving from apartment to apartment, I probably would not have had the foundation that I had. So I was allowed to grow up in Mississippi for the first 6 years of my life, and allowed to feel somewhat special because I was a precocious child, I guess by any standards now. I was taught to read at an early age, and by the time I was 3, I was reciting speeches in the church. And they'd put me up on the program and they'd say, and little Mistress Winfrey will render a recitation. And I would do Jesus rose on Easter Day. Hallelujah, hallelujah, all the angels did proclaim. And all the sisters sitting in the front row would fan themselves and turn to my grandmother and say, Hadame, this child is gifted. And I heard that enough that I started to believe it. Maybe I am. I didn't even know what gifted meant, but I just thought it meant I was special. And so anytime people came over, I'd recite. Bible verses and poetry. By the time I was 7, I was doing Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods there be for my unconquerable soul. And at the time I was saying, I didn't know what I was talking about, but I'd do all the motions, out of the night that covers me. And people would say, ooh, that child can speak. And so that's, whatever you do a lot of, you get good at doing it. And that's just about how this whole broadcasting career started for me. I was an orator for a long time. I've been an orator really basically all of my life, 3.5, and then coming up in the church speaking. I did all of James Weldon Johnson's sermons. He has a series of 7 sermons, beginning with the creation and ending with judgment. I used to do them for churches all over the city of Nashville. I've spoken at every church in Nashville at some point in my life, I think. And you sort of get known for that. Other people were known for singing. I was known for talking. And by the time I entered college, what I really wanted to do was be an actress, but I got hired in television. And so I never was able to make any of the play rehearsals. Story of my life. Well, I was living with my mother and living under circumstances that a lot of young children have to deal with today. Even. We weren't living in the projects. And if you'd asked me at the time if we were poor, I probably would have said no, because when you are living it and you don't know anything else, you think that's the way life is. And I was raped when I was 9 by a cousin and never told anybody until I was in my late 20s. Not only was I raped by a cousin, I was raped by a cousin and then later sexually molested by a friend of the family and then by an uncle. It was just an ongoing, continuous thing. So much so that I started to think, this is the way life is. And not until, I'd say, a year ago did I release the shame for myself. Because I was in the middle of an interview with a woman named Trudy Chase, who has multiple personalities and was severely abused as a child. And I think it was on that day that for the first time, I recognized that I was not to blame because I became a sexually promiscuous teenager, and as a result of that, got myself into a lot of trouble, and believed that I was responsible for it. It wasn't until I was 36 years old, 36, that I connected the fact, that's why I was that way. I always blamed myself. Even though intellectually I would say to other kids, I would speak to people and say, the child is never to blame. You're never responsible for molestation in your life. I still believed I was responsible somehow, that I was a bad girl. And just released it in the middle. And so it happened on the air, as so many things happened for me, happened on the air in the middle of somebody else's experience. And so I thought I was going to have a breakdown on television. And I said, stop, we've got to stop rolling cameras. And they didn't. And so I sort of got myself through it. But it was really quite traumatic for me. Mm-hmm. My openness is the reason why I did not do so well as a news reporter, because I used to go on assignments and be so open that I would say to people at fires and they'd lost their children, that's okay, you don't have to talk to me. Well, then you go back to the newsroom and the news director, what do you mean they didn't have to talk to you? I say, but she just lost her child and, I just felt so bad. So I didn't do very well. I was absolutely too involved. I'd go to funerals of people and not go in. I wouldn't want to talk to them, disturb them. Cry on the air. I think the lesson that you learn from allowing yourself to be abused as a child is an ongoing lesson. What I recognize is that the same thing that in some cases causes a child to be abused is the same thing that causes, you to be abused as an adult, is the same thing that in your adulthood that allows you to never be able to say no to people. And I realized that I was the kind of child who was always searching for love and affection and attention and somebody to look at me and say, yes, you are worthy. And unfortunately, there are adults who will take advantage of that and misread your intentions. And just part of the process for me as an adult has been to come to recognize that my inability as an adult female to say no, I call it my disease to please as a female, is the same thing that caused me to be victimized as a child. Because many times I would get myself into situations as an adult where I didn't want to say no because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I didn't want to say no because I didn't want anybody angry with me. I didn't want to say no because I don't want people to think I'm not nice. And that to me has been the greatest lesson of my life, is to recognize that I am solely responsible for it, and not trying to please other people, not living my life to please other people, but doing what my heart says all the time. That's the biggest lesson for me. The other big lesson for me has been to learn, not only do you have the right to do whatever you want, you have the right to change your mind, which has gotten me into so much trouble in my life. Like I'd say, but I have to because I said I was going to do it. And then later you think about it and you realize I shouldn't be doing this, but I said I was going to do it and I don't want to make anybody upset. And it's taken me 37 years to figure that out, to get that straight. I think, oh my goodness, if I had learned this 20 years ago, all the time I could have saved. Look where I could have been. And I don't know if men have this problem. I think men who are, for instance, abused sexually or physically, that it manifests outwardly in some way, that their anger and their rage takes on a different kind of direction. I think women, to a great extent, and I know many, many women who were sexually abused, internalize it and then allow themselves to abuse themselves later on in life. You just don't allow yourself to be all that you can be. Whereas a man will make it more external and will be angrier. I don't believe that anything happens without a reason. I don't believe it. And in order to believe that is the truth, you have to believe it in all circumstances. So I say, if you're going to take responsibility for your life, then you have to take it in all forms. I certainly wish that I had been the kind of child who told the first time. And so because I wasn't the kind of child who did that, a part of my mission in life now is to encourage every other child who's abused. You tell, and if they don't believe you, you keep telling. You tell everybody until somebody listens to you. And if nothing else, that's part of something good that came out of that experience for me, because I don't want it to happen to another child. I don't want another child to be afraid of saying, this is what happened to me. The greatest thing about what I do for me is that I'm in a position to change people's lives. It is the most incredible platform for influence that you could imagine. And it's something that I hold in great esteem and take full responsibility for. I do every show in prayer, not down on my knees praying, but I do it in sort of before every show, a mental meditation in order to get the correct message across, because you're dealing with millions of people every day, and it's very easy for something to be misinterpreted. And so my intention is always, regardless of what the show is, whether it's about sibling rivalry or wife battering or children of divorce, for people to see within each show that you are responsible for your life, that although there may be tragedy in your life, there's always a possibility to triumph. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and that the ability to triumph begins with you. Always, always. It's a glorious thing. I feel very blessed that as a kid, when I was growing up, and especially in the 3rd and 4th grade, I always wanted to be a minister and preach and be a missionary. And then for a while, after Miss Duncan's 4th grade class, I wanted to be a 4th grade teacher. And I think in many ways that I have been able to fulfill all of that. I feel that my show is a ministry. We just don't take up a collection. And I feel that it is a teaching tool without preaching to people about it. I really do. That is my intent. That is my intent. And I couldn't do the kinds of shows that I see some other people do. I couldn't. And I've reached a level of maturity in this work myself. There was a time when I first started out that I would say I was far more exploitive. You just put a person on for the purpose of having. I wouldn't do that anymore. I was in the middle of a show with some white supremacist skinheads, Ku Klux Klan members, and in the middle of that show, I just had a flash. I thought, this is doing nobody any good. Nobody. And I had rationalized the show by saying, oh, people need to know that these kinds of people are out here. I won't do it anymore. I just won't do it. There's certain things I won't do. Satanism of any kind of Satan worship, I won't do. I no longer want to give a platform to racists. I just don't, because I think no good can come of it. And so if you don't know that it exists, I'm sorry, you won't hear it here. But that's growth for me. I did a show, taped a show last year with a guy who was a mass murderer who killed 80 people. And I did the whole interview, and I had the families on of some of the people he killed. In the middle of it, I thought, I shouldn't be doing this. This is not going to help anybody. It's a voyeuristic look at a serial killer. But what good is it going to do anybody? And it didn't air it. I loved books so much as a child. They were my outlet to the world. And I still do. People ask me, what do you do in your spare time? That's what I do. I read. There's so many books. I went through a period of Lois Linsky books. She wrote Strawberry Girl and lots of stories about these little peasant children. And I went through a period where I wanted to be them. And what I would do is I'd read the character, and whatever book I was reading, that's who I wanted to be that week. I read a book in the 3rd grade about Katie John, and who hated boys, and she had freckles. Well, Lord knows I'm not going to have freckles, no way, no how. But I tried to put some on. And I went through my Katie John phase. I think the book that moved me the most growing up was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Oh, and because I had a tree in my backyard too, so I identified with her. I just thought, well, this is my life. And then I discovered Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And I thought, well, first of all, it's the first time I'd ever encountered another woman who had been sexually abused. I couldn't imagine it. I felt that way too when I read The Color Purple. I read the first page of The Color Purple, put the book down and wept. I could not believe it, that someone had put this in writing. It's unbelievable. Yes, to know that you're not the only one, because at all this time, you carry this burden. You think, nobody else in the world has been through this. Nobody else is as bad as you. And then you discover that you're not so bad after all. It's an amazing thing. Very strict father, but I love him for it today. At the time, I thought I couldn't imagine any human being being so strict. And what was he being so strict for? Yes, he was a big influence in my life, just not even as much strict as he was, had some concerns about me making the best of my life and would not accept anything less than what he felt was my best. I remember my father saying to me, you can't bring C's in this house because you're not a C student. If you were a C student, you could, because I'm not trying to make you do or be anything that you can't be. But you're not a C student, you're an A student. So that's what we expect in this house. And it was just so matter of fact. And I knew he was not faking it one bit. So I never even tried it. I never even tried to bring in a C, because I realized it's just not acceptable. Now, when I was living with my mother, I was very rebellious. I was, as I said, promiscuous and rebellious, and did everything I could get away with, including faking a robbery at my house to save my glasses and my dog one time. I remember, stomping the glasses in the floor and putting myself in the hospital and acting out the whole scene. And I used to pull all kinds of pranks, ran away from home. I got to my father's house. I used to lie to my mother all the time. I'd stay out, make up stories. I moved to my father's house. I never told another lie. Because I knew it wasn't going to be accepted. I knew okay, it stops right here. I needed structure and attention. I require a lot of attention. And now I get the attention of 20 million people. It's a little too much attention. It's a lot of attention, yeah. I wanted it, I got it. I got some attention, I tell you. I got picked as 2 students in the state. And I think I was 16 years old at the time for a White House Conference on Youth. I was being interviewed by a local radio station. And a year later, I was 17 at this time, there was a contest being sponsored in town called the Misfire Prevention Contest. And the guy who'd interviewed me at the radio station, his name was John Heidelberg, remembered me. He just remembered that I'd given him a nice interview when I was a kid. And they needed a teenager. So he said, what about that girl that was here last year? Yes. And so I was all of a sudden representing this radio station in the Misfire Prevention Contest, where all you had to do was parade around in an evening gown, answer some questions about your life. It was one of those little teeny tiny beauty pageants. Well, nobody expected me to win the pageant because we were still Negroes at the time. And I've been colored, Negro, black, now I'm African American. So we're still Negroes, and I was the only Negro in a pageant of all red-haired girls, and it's the Misfire Prevention Contest. So the Lord knows I'm not going to win. So I was very relaxed about it. I thought, well, I got a new gown, and this is great. So when it came time for the question and answer period, they asked, what would you do if you had $1 million? And one girl said, if I had $1 million, I'd buy my mom a fridge tire, my dad a truck. Someone else said they had $1 million, they'd buy their brother Bubba a motorcycle because he's always wanted one, and they'd give it to the poor. And I said, all totally relaxed because I'm not going to win anyway, if I had $1 million, I would be a spending fool. I'm not quite sure what I would spend it on, but I would spend and fool. Well, I ended up winning, and there was another question about what I would like to do with my life, my career. Well, everybody wanted to be a nurse or a teacher, and I made this big speech about broadcast journalism, mainly because I had seen Barbara Walters that morning on the Today Show. So I thought, no, see, what can I be? I can't be a nurse, can't be a teacher, because that's what they were. So I said I wanted to be a broadcast journalist because I believed in the truth, was interested in proclaiming the truth to the world. And I won the contest. Well, what a shock Negro me. And that was the beginning of my broadcasting career, because when I went back to the radio station to pick up my Longines watch and my digital clock, they asked me would I like to hear my voice on tape. They said, would you like to hear your voice on tape? Just sort of as a little treat for me. Come here, let's listen to your voice. And I started to read. Now, I've been reading since I was 3. They couldn't believe how well I read, and I was hired there. So somebody said, sit down and read, and they said, come hear this girl read. And then someone else, and before I knew, there were 4 guys standing in the room listening to me read. And I was hired, 17 years old, in radio. At the time, I was still a senior, so I had to only work after school. So I'd finish, get there by 3:30, and I'd do on-the-air newscasts. Well, all my friends just hated me because they're cutting grass. And my sophomore year in college, someone heard me on the radio and said, we heard you on the radio. Would you be interested in working in television? And I turned them down 3 times. And the 3rd time, I had a college professor. I said, they keep calling me to be on television. And I know if I do television, I'll never finish school. So he said, don't you know that's why people go to school, so that somebody can keep calling them, you nitwit. So I went and I interviewed for the job, and Chris Clark gave me the job. I interviewed for the job in television. I've never even been behind the scenes of television. I was 19 at the time, so I decided to pretend to be Barbara Walters, because that's how I'd gotten into this in the first place. So I sat there pretending with Barbara in my head, did everything I thought she would do, and I was hired. It was amazing. As a matter of fact, it was because of the riots of the 70s that I think they were looking for minorities. They were trying to fulfill all of their quotas and programs. And so I was hired as a token and had to take the heat from my college classmates. I went to an all-black college with them calling me a token. And I used to say, yeah, but I'm a paid token. And I recognized that, and at the time I didn't even know it was a pun. I was thinking, yeah, but they pay me. And I was very defensive about it, because I've always had to live with the notion of other black people saying, oh, for any amount of success that you achieve, they say, oh, you're trying to be white, you're trying to talk white, you're trying to be white, and so forth. which is such a ridiculous notion to me. Since you look in the mirror every morning and you're black, there's a black face in your reflection. So I, had to live with that whole thing of, trying to, and it was very uncomfortable for me at first, because when I first started as a broadcaster, I was 19, very insecure, thrown into television, pretending to be Barbara Walters, looking nothing like her, and still going to college. So I do all my classes in the morning from 8 to 1, and then in the afternoon I work from 2 to 10 and did the 6 o'clock news. And would stay up and study and all that stuff, until 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then just start the routine all over again. And my classmates were so jealous of me that I remember taking my little $115 paycheck, and at the time I thought it was really a lot, but taking $115 and trying to appease them. I would always, anytime anybody needed money, I was always offering, oh, you need $10, or taking them out for pizza, ordering pizza for the class and things like that. Trying to, that whole disease to please, that's where it was the worst for me, I think, because I wanted to be accepted by them and could not be, because first of all, I didn't have the time. They wanted me to pledge, and I didn't have the time to pledge. I didn't have the time to be a part of all the other college activities or a part of that whole lifestyle. And it was very difficult for me socially, really one of the worst times of my life, because I was trying to fit in school and be a part of that culture, but also trying to build a career in television. Well, now I think it's courageous, and the interesting thing about it is, if you were telling me my life story and it was about somebody else, I'd say, oh, how courageous. It's very difficult for me to give myself that credit. I mean, it's very difficult for me to even see myself as successful, because I still see myself as in the process of becoming successful. To me, successful is getting to the point where you are absolutely comfortable with yourself, and it does not matter how many things you have acquired. The ability to learn to say no and not to feel guilty about it, to me, is about the greatest success I have achieved. The fact that I have, in the public side, done whatever is fine. It's all a part of a process for growing for me. But to me, to have the kind of internal strength and internal courage it takes to say, no, I will not let you treat me this way, is what success is all about. It's the same thing that prevents you from being abused as a child, that prevents you from being abused as an adult, that allows you to build success for yourself. I will not be treated this way. I demand only the best for myself. You are worthy to say no. That it's okay if you say no. It's okay if you say no and then people don't like you. That's really okay. The important thing is how you feel about what you're doing, how you feel about yourself. It's a long struggle, though. It's a long struggle. And I'm just hoping that, in the work that I do on the show and the speaking that I do around the country, and that young people who are watching this can get the lesson sooner than I did. Because it's painful, because you keep repeating it over and over and over until you get it right. And what I found is that every time you have to repeat the lesson, it gets worse. Because I call it God trying to get your attention, the universe trying to get your attention. So we didn't get your attention the first time, so we're going to have to hit you a little harder this time. So I'm still doing it. I'm still learning. It seems worse because it gets worse. Yeah. I say this. I say many times, I say the universe is always trying to get your attention. I use universe and God interchangeably. It's trying to get your attention. And sometimes it starts out, any major problem you encounter, it always started out as a whisper. By the time it gets to be a storm, you've had a pebble knock you upside the head, you've had a brick wall, you've had the house to fall down, and before you know it, you're in the eye of the storm. But long before you're in the eye of the storm, you've had many warnings, like little clues. So now my goal in life is to not to have to hit the eye of the storm, is to catch it in a whisper, to get it the first time. And getting it comes from understanding I think the one thing that has allowed me to certainly achieve both material success and spiritual success is the ability to listen to my instinct. I call it my inner voice. It doesn't matter what you call it, nature, instinct, higher power, but the ability to understand the difference between what your heart is saying and what your head is saying. I now always go with the heart. Even when my head is saying, oh, but this is the rational thing, this is really what you should do, I always go with that little feeling, the feeling. I am where I am today because I have allowed myself to listen to my feelings. My ability to get people to open up is only attributed, I think, to the fact that there's a common bond in the human experience. We all want the same things. And I know that. I really do know that I am no different than anybody else. Now, one of my greatest struggles in life has been to come to recognize that I am as worthy as the next guy. And I think that the moment you start thinking that you're better than somebody else, then you've lost sight of who you are. Because the truth of the matter is, we're all the same. And I know that. I really know that. And I think people sense that. And so people, I'm telling you, I don't see myself certainly as a celebrity, as a star, because people are so familiar with me. It's not like with other celebrities. I see people react to other people, and it's not like it is to me. People say, "Hey, Oprah, come on over here and sit down." Every day at the end of the show, they say, "You want to go to lunch? You want to come to my house? We're fixing so-and-so for dinner." I mean, it's just, if I'm sitting out at a restaurant, people come up and they sit down, they bring their children. It's just very familiar. And I think that the ability to, the reason why people open up so much on my show is because I open up. They feel comfortable doing it, and they know that I am not going to ridicule them. I want everybody on the show, even if I disagree with you, to leave with a sense of dignity, to maintain their own dignity. You know, and a lot of people, like critics, for instance, don't get it. There's some people who, who criticize the show. Now, I take criticism very seriously. There have been, I can't say that I'm one of those people who does not read criticism, because I do. And if someone criticizes something and it strikes a nerve with me, I will then move to correct it. I mean, I have written critics who have said things that I thought were very valid. Recently, someone criticized us for airing a show on mothers who had gone through postpartum depression and had killed their children, and they were saying that the show should not have aired in the afternoon because of the children watching. And I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a very valid point. We should have considered that. That's one of the things I did not think about. I'm thinking that I'm going to help all these mothers who are going through this, but that person was absolutely right. So if the criticism is valid and comes from a point of view of being well thought out and not just to attack, I accept it. And I usually get better as a result of it. Critics have actually helped me to get better. I am, of all things in my life, I would say I'm a truth seeker. I'm a truth seeker, and I believe that, the cliche, the truth shall set you free. I absolutely believe that. And so if you're telling me the truth, I accept it and will move on it. The thing that has caused me the greatest dismay or disappointment in this life has been the fact that people can write things about you that are not true. It's astounding to me. It's astounding, and I don't want to sound like, one of those people who's, in the public complaining about it, but it is just astounding to me that it can happen. And had it not happened to me, I would not believe somebody else complaining about it. I'd say, well, some of it has to be true. And that is, it's really my only gripe about being who I am right now, is that people can say things and print them, and they're not true, that you can just sit up and make up stories. It goes against everything I believe in, because I really don't care what you print about me if it's the truth. I think I've adjusted pretty well. I think I'm really, I'm probably one of the most balanced people I know to live under such a microscope, I think. And I think that you have to put it all in perspective and understand who you really are. And who I really am is not some person who's, just on television every day. That is something that I do. And what I think is important is for people to not to look at my life or anybody else's life, particularly celebrities, because I think adoration is unhealthy. And, when you look at the list of people that students choose to admire in this country, I think that there's so many people who do such incredible things. Incredible things. I was, last year met the guy who split the neutrons in two, and they do things you think, my God, they do things to atoms that you can't even pronounce. And I think, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if those kinds of people got publicity? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we paid attention to some of the more humanitarian things that are going on, things that are really of value. I think just because you can do a video and you can dance really well, or you can sit on a talk show and you can talk to people, that is not necessarily to be held in the highest of esteem, because that isn't what makes life meaningful. It really is not. I think the most important thing to get ahead falls back to what I truly believe in, and that is the ability to seek truth in your life. And that's on all forms. You have to be honest with yourself. You can be pursuing a profession because your parents say it's the best thing. You can be pursuing a profession because you think you'll make a lot of money. You can be pursuing a profession because you think you're going to get a lot of attention. None of that will do you any good if you're not being honest with yourself. And the honesty comes from your natural born instinct will tell you when you're doing something whether or not this feels right. You feel a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment and worthiness to the world in such a way that you know you're doing the right thing. You don't have to ask anybody. When you're doing the right thing, you don't have to say, you think this is okay? It's like, and it works on every level. Whether or not you're going to a party or you're choosing a dress or you're choosing a friend, if you ever have to say, do you think this is okay? Chances are it is not, because that's your instinct trying to get you to ask yourself that question. Maybe this isn't okay. I feel that luck is preparation meeting opportunity, because the reason I feel so strongly about that, and it's not just a saying for me, I was hired in television in 1973, right after the riots of 71, 72. And other black and female people were hired at the same time. People accused me of being a token at the time. It didn't really bother me because I realized that I was going to stay there. Once I got there, I realized nobody's getting me out of here. This is not just a phase for me. And so I sort of began to create my own luck. I said I knew how to edit when I didn't. I said I knew how to report on stories. I went to my first city council meeting. I wasn't quite sure of what to do, but I had told the news director that I did. So then what you have to do is be willing to admit that you know nothing. So I walked into the city council meeting and I announced to everybody there, this is my first day on the job and I don't know anything. Please help me, because I've told the news director, Channel 5, that I know what I'm doing. Please help me. And they did. And from that point on, I mean, all those councilmen became my friends, and I'd come in the council meeting and they helped me out. And I realize now it was because of my willingness to say, I don't know it, but if you will just, if you will just help me out. So that I learned, and I also learned that when, one of the biggest lessons I've learned recently is that when you don't know what to do, you should do nothing until you figure out what to do. Because a lot of times you feel like you're pressed against the wall and you've got to make a decision. You never have to do anything. No, don't know what to do. I do nothing. I wait. And that has been a big lesson. To be willing to be still with myself and trust myself and my higher power to help me make the right decision and to not feel pressured. See, I think, we create stress for ourselves because you feel like you have to do what you have to do it. You have to. I don't feel that anymore. All the mistakes I've made in my life, I've made because I was trying to please other people. Every one of them. There's not one that I've made because I did something because I really wanted to do this for myself. Every mistake I've ever made is because I went outside of myself to do something for somebody else that I should not have, to please them, just for the purpose of pleasing them. Not good. Yeah, it was a lot of trouble just to get to be an actress. I ended up building my own studio because when I was shooting The Color Purple, I was not allowed the kind of freedom that was necessary to do that work. And what I really want to do is to create films for myself and other people that uplift, enlighten, encourage, and entertain people. And in order to do that, I need time. So I was working under a situation where I only had so much time to do it. So when the studio became available, as I say, to me, success is a process. There was this empty studio, old vacant lot available. And I have a partner who said to me, there's that studio available. And if you take over your own show, well, it had never occurred to me that that could happen. The studio came to be as a roundabout way for me to get to be an actress. I've been trying to be one since I was 3. And it happened as a part of an ongoing process for me. When, it's much easier for me to make major life, multi-million-dollar decisions than it is to decide on a carpet for my front porch. That's the truth. I was in the Kmart store, and I couldn't decide between the ones with the kittens and the ducks. I had them all laid out. They're $5.99 a piece. It took me longer to make that decision as to which mat I would have for when you first welcome friends, welcome to my house, all that, Took me longer to make that decision than it did to decide to get my own studio. I have a lawyer, manager, who he and I are now partners, who came to me and said, you can own your own show. And before he said that to me, I thought, own my own show. I just totally dismissed it because the idea, how am I going to own my own show? I have a contract. What am I going to do? He said, you can own your own show, and there is a studio that was the old Fred Nile studio that is going to become available. It needs a lot of work. And I thought nothing of it at the time. I totally dismissed it because he was always making projections and coming up with ideas. And I just thought okay, I'll let him dream on, just as my speech coach had said to me many years ago, dream on, because I had a really solid contract. When I was shooting The Color Purple, I didn't have enough time to shoot it. I was begging for time because I realized that what we were doing was something very special. But it's very difficult to convince, news people that. Oh no, it's really not what you think. So the studio came about as a result of me wanting more time and creativity and control for myself. I bought the studio so that I would be able to act and do the show at the same time, so that I would be able to do 2 things that were very important to me. The show's very important to me because it is a platform from being able to make a difference in people's lives, to influence them to change for the better. And so I don't want to give that up until it's time, and I will know when it's time. I don't want to be the kind of person that stays in the ring too long and gets punch drunk from the experience. I just want to be able to do it for as long as it works. And I know it's not going to work forever. And for as long as I can be of influence and make a difference, then that's what I want to do. But I also want to act because I think that being able to create work that, for one, puts the Black cultural experience on screen, that's very important to me. I've been Black, I've been female all my life. That's the only thing I know. So I know that experience. I love being a woman, and I love being a Black woman. I read mostly female literature because, I just find like I'm drawn to it. If I'm in a bookstore, I'm just sort of like kind of drawn to the women writers because that's what I know. And so I want to be able to put that on screen. I want to be able to do work that encourages, enlightens, uplifts, and entertains people. There's work I would not do. I get offered a number of scripts and have chosen not to do them because, fortunately, I'm in the position that I don't have to work for the sake of working. To me, it's far more important to the process of the work is far more important to me in many cases than the end result. Once the picture's finished, that's fine. But to me, the process of working on it, for me, every day, the process of working on a show and being in the midst of the show, being right in the heart of it, is far more stimulating, fulfilling, and exciting to me than, finish the show. Then I'm on to the next thing. That's so interesting to me because I read that too. And I read that and I think, well, what does this mean? It was so interesting. Like one day I was on the Forbes list and somebody said, I saw you on the Forbes list. And it was like, it just was another thing that had happened. It wasn't like, oh my God, I made the Forbes list. What I find though, is once you make it, there's a competitive streak in you. Because now I go, well, where was I on the list? So first I didn't care about making it. Now I remember calling up Bill Cosby saying, could you loan me some money so I could be number 5? Because I got beat out by New Kids on the Block. Could you please give me a few? But other than that, it doesn't register. It is very difficult for me to see myself as other people see me. It's very difficult. I don't know what that means. I don't know what being Oprah Winfrey means to other people from the outside, because I still feel the same. I really do. I feel the same as I did when I was 22 and struggling. I still, because it's the struggle has taken on a different form for me. The struggle is more of an inner self struggle, trying to find the truth for myself now than it is trying to get enough money to pay my light bill. And so actually it was easier trying to find enough money to pay my light bill than discovering what the truth of your life is all about. And so what other people view as successful is not what my idea of success is. And I don't mean to belittle it at all. I think it's really nice to be able to have nice things. What material success does is provide you with the ability, I think, to concentrate on other things that really matter. And that is being able to make a difference, not only in your own life, but in other people's lives. That's really all it's good for. It's because you no longer have to focus your attention on how you're going to pay your car note and whether or not you're going to sign your last name so that when the check gets there, they can send it back to you. You can say, oh, forgot to sign it. You don't have to play those games anymore. So you really have the time and the attention to focus on other things. And the big question for me in my life is now that I have achieved some material success is, what do I do with it? How do I use this to make a difference? For me, education is about the most important thing because that is what liberated me. Education is what liberated me. The ability to read saved my life. I would have been an entirely different person had I not been taught to read when I was at an early age. My entire life experience, my ability to believe in myself, and even in my darkest moments of sexual abuse and being physically abused and so forth, I knew there was another way. I knew there was a way out. I knew there was another kind of life because I'd read about it. I knew there were other places and there was another way of being. And so it saved my life. So that's why I now focus my attention on trying to do the same thing for other people. Education. I don't think you ever stop giving. I really don't. I think it's an ongoing process. And it's not just about being able to write a check. It's being able to touch somebody's life in such a way that Mrs. Duncan touched mine. It's being able to make a child see the light in him or herself, making someone else see that for themselves. I know that if I didn't have the money, listening to somebody who had it, I'd probably not believe them, because you can't believe it. Because if you don't have money and you're just trying to make ends meet, you think if you just could make ends meet, that would make everything all right for you. What I know is that if you do work that you love and work that fulfills you, the rest will come. And that I truly believe that the reason I've been able to be so financially successful is because my focus has never, ever for 1 minute been money. And the fact that the money has come has really surprised me. I've been just really surprised and delighted and very pleased and many times overwhelmed by it. But the money has never been the focus. The reason, I think if you're on the road to success, is if you would do your job and not be paid for it. And I would do this job and take on a second job to make ends meet if nobody paid me, just for the opportunity to do it. That's how you know you're doing the right thing. I have people that I trust, and one of the things that, if I may pat myself on the back for, is that I try to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am. I think that the ability to be as good as you can be comes from understanding who you are and what you can and cannot do. And what you can't do is far more important than what you can do, if what you can't do is going to keep you from flying as high as you can. Now, when my lawyer first came to me and said, you can own your own show, it literally took the ceiling off my brain, because I had never even thought that high before. I never even thought that was possible. And everybody needs somebody in their life to say, yes, you can do it. I have a niece, who's 15, who several years ago, I said to her the same thing my father said to me. I said, you are too smart to get C's. I mean, I heard my father speaking. We were crossing the street one day and she was talking about her grades. You're too smart to do that. You could be an A student. And she said, do you really think I can? Oh, of course. I said, you're such a bright person. And she started getting A's and said to me a year later, nobody ever told me I could. And I think that one of the most important lessons to learn is that we are all responsible for our lives, but nobody gets through this life alone. Everybody needs somebody to show them a way out or a way up. Everybody does. See, I feel best in surroundings where other people are smarter than I am, because I feel like I can always learn something from them. One of the other big lessons I've learned, particularly in business, I think you have a responsibility to yourself to learn as much about your business as you can. And so I sign every check, although it is now tedious, because the bills that come in from maintaining a studio, everything from Federal Express to Xerox to every tape that needs repaired and so forth, it gets to be a lot. I have stacks and piles of checks to do, and I know that there are a lot of successful people who don't do that. I still have a tenement mentality. I've been very, very poor in my life. And so the idea of having money and not being responsible and knowing how much money you have and keeping control of it is not something that I personally can accept. I know that there are other people who can, but it is not a possibility for me. I need to know where it is. I mean, there are times I think I want to go to the bank and say, show it to me, because, just seeing it on a piece of paper, anybody could print out a piece of paper. So, I watch it very carefully and try to maintain responsibility for it. But my success in business has come, when I first started being a, quote, businesswoman, I worried about, how do you do this? And I realized that you do this the same way as you do anything else. You be fair. Try to be honest with other people, and you be fair. A 12-hour days, 15. 12-hour day is a 12-hour day is a short day for me. I feel like after a 12-hour day, what am I going to do with the rest of my day? I get home, I don't know what to do with myself, because I have all of this time left over. I don't know what to do. So I feel most comfortable working 14 to 16 hours, because then at least I can go home. Usually I take a bubble bath. I love bubbles. Now that's the one big luxury I've given myself, is that now that I've attained some material success, I will use an entire half a bottle of bubble bath at one time. Really extravagant. And I'm really particular about the kind of bubbles too. Like, I don't want the kind that drip down off of your arm, poor quality bubbles. I like the kind that cover your arm and the bubbles stay. So I'll go home and take a bubble bath, and usually get in bed with a pile of books. Pile of books, papers, magazines. I have to read a lot for the show. Most of the show's questions, though, come from my own natural whatever I want to know about a particular subject. And I find I'm best in situations where I just go right off the top of my head. I ask what I want to know. And that's what being in television for a long time, I think, and also getting comfortable with yourself allows you to do. Because if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake. I could tell you, it's like Steve Martin has a joke about how some people go to the drugstore and they sell flare pins. And he says, and I get paid for doing this. And I feel the same way. I feel like I would do it if I didn't get a dime for it. And that's why you're doing the right thing, because it doesn't even feel like work. It doesn't feel like work.